Hello, I am Crispin Parelius Johannessen. Today I am going to show you slightly over 8,000 photos from a 6 to 7 minute ride earlier this year with the intention of focusing on the horse. I hope to give you some insight into photographic practice and selection process, as 50 photos were selected from the several thousand with the criteria of showing bit pressure and tongue and gum contrast. In response to this, I received an email asking me, quote, "Are all the pictures bad pictures, or are you just sending the moments where you can find something to criticize? Do you in the lot have pictures where the horse is with a closed mouth and a nice expression?" Unquote. Bad pictures and nice expression are much used terms today, and as I see them as highly subjective, without it being defined what is meant with these terms, it is difficult to respond to the questions directly in relation to the photographs in question. However, it must be said I did look through all photographs and found no photos where the horse had a closed mouth, if that should mean lips being sealed. The viewer may follow a given link and view all photos at a later time and make their own interpretations. However, as I have wanted to somehow answer these questions, as they seem so topical in today's viewing of my work and also in relation to this symposium about cultural change, I will read extracts from my chapter Descriptive Falstable Moments, or the Art of Equestrian Photography Made Popular, which is in the anthology Equine Cultures in Transition, published 2019. I wrote this chapter in 2017-18. Today's symposium is about cultural change. I hope the listener will make reflections around that the chapter was written almost 8 years ago and that the accompanying photographs are from earlier this year. I have started by showing you a quick scroll through all the roughly 8,300 photos. I then show you the 50 selected, following that I choose one by one of the 50 and show you the surrounding sequences in the larger folder. Descriptive Falstable Moments, or the Art of Equestrian Photography Made Popular. Despite being a huge debate, I could see then and now no official attempts, practices or guidelines to secure visual documentation outside of the competition arena. In attempt to prove or disprove abuse, surely someone should be securing valid documentation. To do this, of course, one needs to discuss how to create the documentation, and there appears to be little willingness to do so. The visual material from warm-ups that caused controversy were a little undercover in style, with low quality production, and usually dismissed as being attacks on the horse world from activists. With a few exceptions, they were mostly published on social media with a claim that the photographs exposed rider brutality towards the horse in the sport, an opinion increasingly supported by a growing audience and scientists. There was ample research by equitation science to support that the depicted posture and details could be interpreted as severely painful and damaging to the horse by loss of vision, ability to breathe, and postures relating to conflict behavior and mental stress. The critics of these images, including the governing equestrian organizations, would however dismiss them as valid documentation exposing brutality because they were made by activists, bad photos due to low quality, the wrong angles, and merely being moments in time, thus lacking in context. It seemed to me that they were dismissing their allegations of brutality based on an attitude that it was the bad quality of photography making the equestrian appear brutal through visual manipulation rather than photographic material describing brutality. As I have worked with both training and teaching horse and rider, I was concerned with the treatment of horses that I experienced as brutal, not just in dressage, but in all disciplines. I am also educated a fine art photographer and video artist, and I am relatively experienced as to how the camera constructs vision. The reluctant and dismissive attitudes towards using photography as a tool to document were increasingly making me wonder what it would take to make equestrian visual documentation be received as meaningful and valid. How can the audience have such different ways of perceiving the same material? Surely we should be able to perceive if the horse is suffering or not. Falstable Moments was an experiment of producing better quality documentation to see how the audience would receive it and hopefully push the question, don't people see any impression of brutality? Or is it that they don't want the impression of brutality made visible? The practice of looking at horses. Over 30,000 years ago, an equine artist started to shape a horse with charcoal on the stone wall of the cave Chauvet in the gorge of Ardèche in the south of France. The cave is believed to contain the oldest paintings of horses. I imagine the artist viewed the horses from a vantage point, taking note of how they stood and moved close enough to see the position of the eyes, the direction of the ears pointing, and the degree of neck flexion. The horse would be opening its mouth, and the nostrils would be dilating to circles. The artist went into the darkness of the cave and painted with charcoal from the memory of his or her perceptions, making anatomical decisions from, for us, an unknown intention. On one of the panels, the artist had decided to paint 4 horses with various degrees of neck flexion and surprisingly large and rounded crests. The artist's idea of leg position is interesting, as one horse has 8 legs. Is this perhaps the artist's first attempt at representing a horse in movement? The horse nearest to the viewer shows clearly a horse with an open mouth, which the archaeologist Dominique Baffy interprets as a horse whinnying. This contemporary interpretation of an ancient document might or might not be the correct. As we see in later artworks, the horse with an open mouth is a popular aspect in the horse-human visual narrative, with many possible reasons and opposing interpretations. The Chauvet cave could be, as suggested by Tamsin Pickerel, where the documented journey of the horse-human relationship begins. Pickerel further claims, in relation to presenting the narrative of the horse in art, that the horse-human relationship is, quote, one of the longest love affairs to traverse history. It is an affair that has been catalogued by the hand of the artist, unquote. For thousands of years, humans have grappled with various ways of showing the horse with different angles, postures, and facial grimaces, for the longest period of time, unaided by photographic technology. Do the details and information seen in the visual documents confirm this suggested love affair? If so, we may wonder what has been included or excluded in this history presented as a love affair. What the photographer saw. Stepping into the role of an equestrian sports horse photographer, I travelled around Europe as an accredited press photographer, producing images for the equestrian press. I wanted to explore the conventions of equestrian photography in sport, to understand the practices and get behind the surface scene. This meant I had to educate myself as to what aesthetic ideals the equestrian sport publishers wanted. For show jumping, the required image was mostly one in which the horse was shown mid-air across the jump, more in the upward movement rather than the downward phase. For dressage, there would be a few more moments the press could publish. Usually they would involve front and hind legs at the highest phase of movement, the most flexed position, such as in the piaffe and passage or pirouettes. The neck should be flexed, but not too much like within Rollkir, as this posture has never been permitted in competition. Another acceptable convention would show the horse at the maximum of leg extensions, such as the extended trot or gallop. I spent time analysing what the equine media wanted, and I made sure I became good at getting the perfect moment, the trophy shots, the ones that could be published. The more I did this, the more I became frustrated at the very limited range of moments that would be considered for publication. It seemed far more limited than I had ever previously imagined. In most sequences of motion, there are potentially thousands of possible shots, and yet I found that the ones we all end up seeing are rather similar and more or less the same phases of motion. It all seemed to me about timing for the perceived perfect moment. In the press room, I started feeling a bit out of place and impatient with the culture producing repeatedly the same trophy shots, the very same select moments in time, repeated again and again, the same poses, just with a different rider and horse in a different location and time. It seemed to me that everyone was chasing the same trophies, from the press photographers to the publishers and the audience. The seductive hunt for trophy shots had withered away into a distaste to continue selling photographs to the press. The critical artist in me was beginning to awaken, the artist in me that was trained to look where others do not look and question what lies behind what is shown, not least what is not shown, and why. As I am also from an experimental practice of photography and video, I would upload my material and work with different ways of presenting it, slowing down video sequences, reanimating stills to move again, exploring detail. I was beginning to get an understanding of what I could see with the latest advances in camera technology. A new world of information was opening up. I was building up a huge archive of photos that I knew would be unwanted by the equine press, and I wondered what the other photographers did with all these images unwanted by the press and glossy equestrian magazines. I wondered why not show them. I wondered how can you not show them. I wondered how many such unwanted images are immediately deleted from cameras or hidden away in hard drives never to be seen. It was increasingly clear that I was not shooting my camera at the same time or in the same direction as other press photographers, and I wondered if my days as an accredited press photographer were numbered, and sure enough, my application of accreditation started being refused. I felt I was observed in a system so sensitive and restrictive as to realize I was not shooting in the conventionally acceptable direction and moment. Audiences started to approach me with accusations of being a nasty person, and I experienced evictions and threats of physical violence if I did not stop photographing. To shoot your camera at the wrong moment during an equestrian event can evoke strong responses from the organizers, riders, and audiences, even when it is in the public areas. It is therefore not just publishing photographs that appears to be problematic, but also shooting them in the first place. If these unseen photographs were merely the wrong moment with the wrong angle, as many would insist, how could this explain that a part of the audience was completely convinced that they portray brutality and violence? In my experience, it is really easy to take photos that look brutal and actually quite a challenge to shoot the ones that give a harmonious impression. There are not many moments that give you the trophy shot. From Muybridge to today, seeing is not believing. To understand the equine community's relationship to photography, I would like to go back to an historical event, one of the more significant earliest projects of photographing the horse in motion, the work of Muybridge. It took roughly 34,000 years from the first equine paintings to the emergence of the camera, a mechanical device constructed to assist our naked eye in perceiving the horse, and it proved to be much better than our perception at capturing motion. The motion shots created by Muybridge had an enormous impact on how we understand vision, perception, nature, and movement. The Muybridge photographs show us that in spite of thousands of years of viewing horses, we had not really understood how they moved, and that our attempts at understanding this, without the camera, were to a large extent very different to how we had imagined. Photography gave us access to visual details so far unseen, unimagined, and perhaps unbelievable. The camera's description showed us that so much of the visual world eludes our perception and consciousness. Muybridge proved that all the horse's legs are off the ground at the same time, thus establishing photography as a tool to record information that our eye cannot see. The value for scientific understanding after this is beyond doubt proved by today's extensive, sophisticated developments in photographic technology, used in research helping us perceive and analyze what our biological eye cannot see, such as with photo finishes. It is perhaps also here we experience the idea in an equine context of the camera as an objective window onto reality that we otherwise don't access. One who wrote most extensively about how our ideas about vision and perception changed with Muybridge's work is Edwin Ray Lancaster. He was stunned at how different the photograph's information was compared to how we had previously imagined it to be, which indicated the inadequacy of our naked eye perceptions. He identifies in Egyptian and Greek equine representations some 100 years BC that there seemed to be only 4 commonly used poses to depict the horse in movement, and none of these were correct compared to the newly established photographic evidence, which showed, quote, that the poses used by artists at different times and in different parts of the world to represent the galloping of the horse have no correspondence to any of the poses actually assumed by a horse as now demonstrated by instantaneous photography, unquote. It is this point that I believe Walter Benjamin later expanded upon. For what were the psychological effects upon us learning that our vision is not veridical, that the way we see the world may be limited, and that our perception does not accurately represent reality, that a mechanical device can reveal what remains otherwise unseen, must be, from an evolutionary and psychological perspective, be a frightening insight that the camera has possibility to expose the unseen, the unexpected, the unintended, the unbelievable, the unwanted, the shocking, the unimaginable, that which is beyond our conscious grasp. This is what I understand Benjamin means by the camera exposing the secret, the optical unconscious, quote, whereas it is commonplace that, for example, we have some idea what involved in the act of walking, if only in general terms, we have no idea at all what happens during the fraction of a second when a person actually takes a step. Photography, with its device of slow motion and enlargement, reveals the secret, unquote. It is perhaps these aspects of equine photography that we sense in the accounts of the first equestrian audience, as they appear to acknowledge and celebrate the photograph's exposure of photography in a scientific light, but at the same time they express a dislike to some of the still images. Apparently, according to Hans Christian Adam, quote, the problem was that on their own, some of the individual photographs showed quite grotesque attitudes, and these were often challenged verbally and in caricature because they ran counter to the pet prejudices that had been established for centuries in the history of art. The conversion from still to moving image would plainly demonstrate their authenticity, unquote. There appears to be an ambivalence in the camera's ability to make visible phenomena secrets that are beyond human perception, on the one hand, enlightening and useful, on the other hand, perhaps disturbing, shocking, and frighteningly revealing. An audience's shock from seeing equestrian brutality exposed by the camera is already present when Muybridge showed his work in the 1870s. Isn't it curious to note the audience is keen to see still images reanimated is a popular request even today. It is as if still images present a distortion of the truth and the moving image as a reliable representation, despite the knowledge that the moving image is nothing but a construction through many still images put together. Is it more popular as the moving images are closer to how our naked eye perceives the horse in motion? Do we prefer to see the moving image as it does not give us time to see detail? Details that were unimagined, the unseen, the unintended, and the unwanted. Perhaps the secret revealed the ugliness of the equestrian image, or even the ugliness in the relationship between horse and human. One thing is for sure, that is that the equestrian community had an ambivalent relationship to still images already from the start of their production, setting the premises for the conventions for what we may or may not publish, or not even permit ourselves to photograph. The question what we do with is what we do with the ugliness that emerges, and what function do the few selected photographs for publication play. This may be obvious, but I think the point should be made that the equine images as we see them today are constructions developed through 150 years of rigorous selection of what we like and don't like to see, rather than an exposure of what photography presents us with. Our interest in understanding the horse visually appears to have been central to our development of photography and understanding of vision and perception. It would seem, however, that this has resulted in the equestrian having a very ambivalent relationship to the camera and its processes. As I understand it, there has been a known dilemma since the emergence of high-speed photography. We want to use the camera for producing trophy images, but we also have problems dealing with the camera's aspect of revealing the unseen, the unknown, and unimagined. Perhaps the camera has psychologically terrorized the equestrian community with its potential uses, at times a useful tool to describe the longest love affair to traverse history, at other times a tool that messes up the documented love narrative really badly with exposing impressions of abuse. The regulatory publishing practices may very well function to keep the monstrosities of equestrianism from being exposed and seen. The social media has definitely made the equestrian image harder to control in such a way. To which extent this practice has been knowingly applied to hide aspects of equestrianism, I can only suspect. I do, however, know that in my huge archive of photography, very little of it is considered publishable, and that this must apply for a greater amount of material than my own, and that there is a vast amount of visual information that is never seen by an audience. If you work in the trade of creating equestrian images, you probably know this. However, for the larger part of the audience, they don't really know what they don't get to see. I would go as far as saying that the denying an audience to view the larger part of what the information the camera records is a form of censorship, conscious or unconscious. And the use of trophy image as a superimposed filter of how the equestrian would like to be seen. A practice of publishing photography secrets which shows more of the imagined, the unseen, the unintended, may have the effect of expanding our visual catalogue and therefore also broadening our perception of the horse. We need to see more, not less. Thank you very much for listening.